I used to believe in the quiet comfort of home, not just the walls or the furniture, but the feeling, the warmth of knowing you belong somewhere, that love and trust make a place yours. For years, that's what I thought I had. Ethan and I built a life here. I could still hear our laughter in the kitchen, still feel his arms around me on slow Sunday mornings. But lately, those memories felt like ghosts. He had changed, and deep down, I knew something was coming. At first, it was little things. He started coming home late, blaming work, barely looking at me when he walked through the door. Dinners turned into silence. His phone was always in his hand, always turned away from my view. I told myself it was just stress, just a rough patch. But the truth was louder than my denial. Love doesn't just disappear overnight. It fades, slowly, painfully, leaving behind an emptiness that's impossible to ignore. And then, the moment I had been dreading arrived. One evening, without hesitation, without remorse, he looked me in the eyes and said, "I want a divorce." Just like that. No discussion, no explanation, no chance to fight for what we had. And then the real knife. He wanted me out of the home we had built together, because he was moving someone else in. His voice was cold, final, as if I were nothing more than a temporary guest. I stood there, staring at him, feeling the weight of his betrayal settle deep in my chest. He expected tears, anger, a desperate plea to stay, but I gave him none of it. I swallowed every emotion, locked my pain behind a steady gaze, and nodded. And then, without a word, without looking back, I walked away. I don't remember grabbing my things. I don't remember walking out the door. It's strange how, in moments of deep betrayal, the mind shuts down, protecting itself from the full weight of the pain. I was moving, breathing, existing, but I wasn't there. My body went through the motions while my heart tried to process the impossible. How did we get here? How did he get here? Outside, the night air hit my skin like ice, but I barely felt it. I walked down the driveway, past the garden I had planted with my own hands, past the porch where we once sat, talking for hours. My home, my life. And just like that, I was supposed to let it go? To leave it behind while she, whoever she was, moved in, took my place, slept in my bed? The thought was nauseating, but I swallowed it down. I wouldn't give Ethan the satisfaction of seeing me break. I reached my car and hesitated, my hands gripping the door handle. Inside, the house was still lit, the shadows of movement flickering through the windows. He was still there, standing in my home, already erasing me from it. My fingers tightened, my breath shallow. This wasn't fair. None of this was fair. But I refused to be the woman who begged a man to stay, who fought for someone who had already chosen to betray her. If he thought I would crumble, he didn't know me at all. So I got in my car, turned the key, and drove away. Not because I had lost, but because for now, I needed to step back and let him believe he had won. I drove with no destination, just the hum of the engine and the dull ache in my chest. The city lights blurred past me, neon reflections sliding over the windshield like ghosts of a life that, until tonight, had felt solid. I should have cried. I should have screamed, broken down, done something. But I didn't. There was only silence inside me, a heavy, suffocating quiet that wrapped around my ribs like steel. Somewhere along the way, I pulled into an empty parking lot, my hands still clenched around the steering wheel. My wedding ring caught the light, a cruel little glimmer against my skin. I stared at it, remembering the day Ethan slid it onto my finger, whispering promises he never intended to keep. Till death do us part. The irony burned. With one slow breath, I pulled it off and placed it on the dashboard. A meaningless circle, a lie I had worn for far too long. I leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes, letting the weight of it all settle. I had lost my home, my husband, my sense of safety. And yet, beneath the grief, something else stirred. Something unexpected. A quiet, steady realization. He thinks he's won. Ethan believed he had all the power, that he could throw me out like I was nothing, rewrite our story to make himself the hero. But he didn't know the truth. I opened my eyes, exhaling slowly. The house was never his. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't call. I didn't beg for explanations or closure. Let him think I had disappeared, licking my wounds somewhere, broken and defeated. That's what men like Ethan wanted, to see the proof of their power in the wreckage they left behind. But I refused to give him that satisfaction. Instead, I waited. I watched, and I let him dig his own grave. It didn't take long for him to flaunt his so-called victory. He moved her in almost immediately. I imagined him walking through the house with her, pointing out the furniture I picked, the artwork I chose, the space I built. The thought of them there together would have shattered me once. Now, it only sharpened my focus. Let him bask in his triumph. Let him drink in the illusion that he had won. He had no idea what was coming. I heard the whispers before I saw the proof. Friends, mutual acquaintances, even my own mother called with hushed voices, unsure of how to tell me the news. Ethan says he kicked you out. Ethan says the house is his now. Ethan says you're never coming back. The arrogance in his lies didn't surprise me. He had always loved control, the feeling of being the one holding all the cards. But this time, he had overplayed his hand. Because the truth, the one undeniable, unshakable truth, was written in ink, sealed in legal documents, locked away in the quiet, unwavering certainty of a contract he had never bothered to read. The house wasn't his. It had never been his, and soon he would find out exactly what that meant. I almost wished I could have seen his face when he opened the letter. A crisp, official document from my lawyer, delivered straight to his new doorstep, the same doorstep where he had stood just weeks ago, telling me to leave. I imagined the way his smug expression must have shifted, the way his fingers probably tightened around the paper as he read every word that shattered his illusion. The property located at our address is solely owned by Sophia Laurent. The occupant, Ethan Laurent, is hereby notified of his unlawful residence and is required to vacate the premises immediately. Poetic justice. The silence that followed was deafening. No calls, no messages, nothing. But I knew better. Ethan wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. He would rage, he would twist the story, try to paint himself as the victim. I could almost hear his voice now, the desperate excuses forming in his mind. There must be a mistake. This can't be happening. But it was. And the best part? It wasn't a game he could manipulate. This wasn't a fight he could win with charm or deceit. This was cold, hard reality, and it had just punched him in the gut. I waited. I knew it wouldn't be long before the inevitable happened, and sure enough, 2 days later, my phone buzzed. Ethan. His name lit up the screen, an echo from a past life. I let it ring, then again, and again. 5 calls in a row. He left a voicemail on the last one, his voice carefully controlled, but I could hear the tremor beneath it. Sophia, we need to talk. I smiled. No, Ethan, we don't. I didn't call him back. He could sit with his confusion, his panic, his growing realization that everything he thought was his had never been his at all. I pictured him pacing through my house, running his hands through his hair, trying to figure out how to undo what he had done. But there was no undoing it, no bargaining, no rewriting history. He had pushed me out of my own home, believing himself untouchable. Now the ground beneath him was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. That same evening I drove by, slowly, unnoticed. The lights were on. A shadow moved behind the curtains. Hers, I assumed. I wondered if he had told her yet. If she knew that the man who had so confidently promised her a future was nothing more than a fool who had lost everything in a single miscalculation. Did she still believe in him? Did she still think he was powerful, capable, worth staying for? The next day, the texts started. First, polite. Sophia, we should talk about this like adults. Then, frustrated. This is ridiculous. You're being unreasonable. And finally, desperate. Please, I made a mistake. We can figure this out. I read them all, but I never responded. He wasn't looking for a conversation. He was looking for a way out of the mess he had created. But this time, there was no escape. 3 days later, my lawyer sent the final notice. The house was mine. He had 48 hours to leave. And just like that, the man who had tried to erase me was about to become the one standing on the other side of the door, unwanted and unwelcome. The day Ethan had to leave my house, I made sure I was there to witness it. Not out of spite. No, this wasn't about petty revenge. This was about justice, about making sure he felt in every fiber of his being the humiliation he had tried to inflict on me. He had taken my home for granted, paraded another woman through my space, acted as if I had never existed. And now, he was about to understand exactly what it felt like to be discarded, powerless, with nowhere to go. I parked across the street, watching as movers carried out boxes and furniture. My furniture. It was almost comical. He hadn't even bothered to buy his own things. He just lived in the remnants of what I had built, as if he could erase me, but keep everything else. His mistress was there too, arms crossed, face tight with frustration. She was beginning to understand, wasn't she? That the man she thought had everything had, in reality, nothing. Ethan stormed out onto the porch, phone pressed to his ear, his voice rising with every word. I could hear the edge of desperation even from a distance. "There has to be a way to fix this," he was saying. "I need more time. No, this isn't— Damn it, listen to me." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me standing by my car. Our eyes met. For the first time in weeks, I saw something new in them. Fear. Ethan lowered his phone, his grip tightening around it like it was the last thing he had control over. I could see the wheels turning in his head, the calculations, the frantic search for a way out. But there was none. Not this time. His mistress— what was her name? I had never even bothered to find out— stood beside him, arms crossed, her expression shifting from anger to something closer to panic. She had bet on the wrong man, and she knew it. I took my time walking toward the house that was mine again. The movers kept working, carrying out his boxes, his clothes, his fragile ego, and dumping them onto the sidewalk like discarded trash. I wondered if this was how he thought I had felt when he told me to leave. Except I hadn't been reduced to pleading. I hadn't been exposed in front of an audience, stripped of dignity. No, I had walked away with my head high. He was the one being dragged out. He took a step toward me, lowering his voice as if that would somehow change anything. "Sophia, can we talk?" The words came forced, coated with the kind of fake sincerity I had once fallen for. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I tilted my head, watching him struggle. "Talk?" I repeated, as if the idea was foreign to me. "About what, Ethan? How you tried to steal what was never yours? How you threw me out and thought you'd won?" I let my gaze drift toward his mistress. "Or maybe you want to explain to her why she's about to be homeless too." Her face hardened. She turned to him, her voice sharp. "You told me this was yours." Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. Ethan's jaw clenched, his eyes darting between me and her, like he was trying to salvage something. His pride, his lies, maybe even his last shred of control. But there was nothing left to save. He had built his empire on deception, and now it was collapsing around him, brick by brick. His mistress, now just another casualty in his self-destruction, took a step back, arms still crossed, but her confidence was unraveling. I crossed my arms, mirroring her stance. "Guess he forgot to mention that, didn't he?" My voice was even, calm. I wanted her to feel it, to understand, in real time, exactly what kind of man she had thrown her lot in with. "He didn't own the house, never did. And now, both of you need to be out, today." She turned on him, her patience snapping like a frayed wire. "Is that true?" she demanded. "You told me this was your house, Ethan." He tried, but the words stuck. The truth had backed him into a corner, and for once, there was no charming his way out. His mistress scoffed, shaking her head in disgust. Then, without another word, she spun on her heel and marched inside, no doubt to pack whatever dignity she had left. Ethan exhaled, a hollow sound, then turned back to me. His face was different now. The arrogance was gone, the bravado shattered. For the first time, I saw him for what he really was: small. Sophia, he said, softer now, almost pleading. I held up a hand, cutting him off. Save it. I didn't need an apology. Didn't need his regret, his excuses, his desperate attempts to undo the damage. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with it. I stepped back, watching as the last of his belongings were dumped onto the sidewalk. You told me to leave, I reminded him, my voice carrying the weight of every betrayal, every moment he had made me feel like nothing. I met his eyes, steady, unwavering. Turns out I was just letting you borrow my home. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, I walked up the porch steps, turned the key in my door, and stepped inside. The last thing I heard before I shut it behind me was Ethan's voice, calling my name, filled with a desperation that came far too late. I locked the door behind me and exhaled, slow and steady. Outside, I could hear the shuffle of footsteps, the low rumble of movers lifting the last of Ethan's things. His voice was muffled now, distant. He was still out there, but it didn't matter. Not anymore. This house was mine, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like mine again. I pressed my palm against the wooden surface of the door, feeling the solid, familiar weight of it beneath my fingertips. This was the same door he had once shut behind me, so sure that he had erased me from this place. The irony of it all settled deep in my chest. Ethan, standing on the other side now, helpless, with nowhere left to go. He had never expected this, never thought for a second that the power he so easily wielded over me would slip through his fingers like sand. His voice broke through the quiet, raw, and frantic. Sophia! He banged his fist against the door, once, twice, and I closed my eyes, letting the sound wash over me. Come on, talk to me. You can't just do this. I smiled to myself. Oh, but I could. I didn't move, didn't answer. I just let him stew in the silence, let him feel what it was like to be shut out, to knock on a door that would never open for him again. A small, cruel part of me wanted to watch, to see the exact moment he realized that all his manipulations, all his arrogance, had led him straight to nothing. Sophia, please. His voice cracked now, the anger draining into something closer to desperation. Just let me explain. Explain what? That he had thought he could throw me away and rebuild his life in my house? That he had assumed, arrogantly, stupidly, that I was weak enough to accept it? That I would let him walk over me without consequence? No. There was nothing left for him to say, and even if there was, I wasn't interested in hearing it. I stepped away from the door, moving toward the windows. Through the sheer curtains, I saw him standing there, pacing like a caged animal, his hands tangled in his hair, his lips moving in silent curses. The movers were gone now. His boxes sat on the sidewalk, each one a monument to his failure. And his mistress? She had disappeared the moment she realized the man she had bet on had nothing left to offer. I almost pitied him. Almost. Ethan stopped pacing. He turned back toward the door, one last attempt at reclaiming control. His hands pressed flat against it, his forehead dropping forward as if he could will it to open. Sophia, I messed up. His voice was quieter now, stripped of all bravado. I was an idiot. I see that now. Just let me in so we can talk. I let his words hang in the air, hollow and meaningless. He wasn't apologizing because he regretted what he did. He was apologizing because he had lost, because his perfect little plan had crumbled beneath him, and now he had nowhere to go. That was what he mourned. Not me, not our life, not the trust he had shattered, just his own downfall. I took a deep breath, steady and unshaken, and reached for the lock, not to open it, but to flip the deadbolt into place. The sound was loud in the quiet night, a final, undeniable answer. His breath hitched. I could hear it, could almost feel the weight of his realization sinking in. There was no second chance. No saving this. No coming back from what he had done. I rested my hand on the door for a moment, savoring the victory, not just over him, but over the version of myself that had once loved him, that had once believed in him. She was gone now, and in her place stood a woman who had reclaimed everything. "Goodbye, Ethan," I said, my voice calm, steady. And then, without another glance, I turned and walked away. The silence in the house felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was peaceful. I stood in the center of the living room, taking in every detail. The space still carried remnants of Ethan's presence, but now they were nothing more than ghosts, fading echoes of a past that no longer held power over me. This house was mine again, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I walked slowly through each room, my fingers brushing over the surfaces I once shared with him. The couch where we had sat together, the dining table where we had eaten countless meals, everything looked the same, but it wasn't. It would never be the same again. And that was a good thing. This wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of everything I had survived, everything I had reclaimed. A deep breath filled my lungs, and I let it out, releasing the last remnants of anger, of betrayal, of hurt. I wasn't carrying it anymore. I wasn't his anymore. I had spent too much time mourning what was already dead. Now, it was time to rebuild. Not just the house, but myself. That night, I poured a glass of wine and stepped out onto the balcony. The air was cool, crisp, carrying the scent of autumn. I leaned against the railing, feeling the quiet hum of the city below, the gentle rhythm of life moving forward. And then, across the street, I saw him. Ethan. He stood there, just beyond the street lamp's glow, half hidden in the shadows. His shoulders hunched, hands stuffed into his pockets, the weight of his downfall pressing down on him. He wasn't the same man who had once smirked at me, so sure of his control, so convinced he would never have to face consequences. No, the Ethan standing there now was small, lost. For a brief moment, I wondered what he was thinking. Did he regret it? Did he finally understand what he had thrown away? Or was he still searching for a way back in, a way to manipulate, to twist, to salvage whatever scraps of power he thought he had left? I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the rich taste settle on my tongue, letting the moment stretch between us, unspoken and heavy. He was waiting for something, a sign, a chance, but there was nothing left for him here. Then, as if finally realizing it himself, he exhaled, a long, defeated breath. His head dropped slightly, his hands tightening inside his pockets, and then, without another word, he turned and walked away. I watched him go, his figure shrinking into the night, step by slow, reluctant step. There was no grand confrontation, no last-ditch plea for forgiveness. Just a man who had lost everything, finally understanding that there was nothing left to fight for. And me? I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt done. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sound of a city that didn't stop for heartbreak or regret. I lifted my glass to my lips again, savoring the taste, the quiet, the finality of it all. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about Ethan. This was about me. About standing in the ruins of what once was and realizing I didn't have to rebuild the same way. Tomorrow, I would start fresh. Maybe I'd repaint the walls, rearrange the furniture, strip away every last trace of him until the space truly felt like my own again. Or maybe I wouldn't. Maybe I'd just wake up, stretch in the sunlight spilling through my windows, and breathe in the newness of my life untouched by anyone else. With one last glance at the empty street below, I turned and stepped back inside. I shut the balcony door, drew the curtains, and left the past standing outside where it belonged.